this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm your host, Pete Mezzetti. My guest this evening is Executive Director of the CIAC, Glenn Lungarini. Glenn, welcome. How are you, my friend?
Doing well, Pete. Great to be back on the show with you again.
I know. Good to see you. Good to see you. One of these days, we're actually going to have to do this in real time, in person, rather than this virtual stuff.
That sounds great. I look forward to those days, and hopefully sooner rather than later, Pete.
I'm hoping. So, Glenn, tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been Executive Director of the CIAC.
Sure, Pete. I came on board with the CIAC just about 3 years ago, so I'm in the middle of my third year as Executive Director right now. Prior to coming to the CIAC, I served as a high school principal. Within my education career, I had the opportunity to serve as an administrator, not only as a principal, but as an assistant principal, athletic director, and department chair. As a teacher, I was fortunate to teach at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels, was able to coach at the middle school, high school, and collegiate level as I spent 7 years as an assistant baseball coach at Yale University.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah, it was a great time there. Had the good fortune to work alongside Coach John Stuper, who I believe is still leading the Bulldogs right now. They had a tremendous year 2 years ago, were slated for a great year last year that cut short, and hoping that they have a chance to get out there this spring.
Exactly. Now, Glenn, let's take a little bit of a reflection time and reflect about the fall season and how everything went.
Yeah, Pete, I tell you, we were just thrilled with the way that we were able to get the experiences for the kids that we were able to provide, and then ultimately the timeframes that played out and the experiences that students were able to enjoy. We were very proud of that. Of course, we weren't able to get all those fall sports running in the capacity that we would have liked, where football only had the opportunity to do the low to moderate risk activities, similar to what we're seeing right now with high risk sports in the winter. That hasn't changed at this point in Connecticut. But with the low to moderate risk sports that we had in the fall, we had over 28,000 athletes compete in those activities. Pete, we had over 33,000 events when you look at games, practices that took place. We did look at how many games were postponed or canceled, how many teams had a quarantine. So how did COVID, impact us? We did relatively well from a standpoint of transmission from school-based, education-based athletics. We only had 7 cases that were traced back to school athletics as being the source of transmission. So that was estimated at a 0.02% transmission rate for education-based athletics. And within our schools, we saw about 15% of our games be rescheduled. And about nearly 3%, just under 3% of games get canceled in the fall. So again, I think the numbers would reflect that it was a very successful fall season.
Absolutely. Now, how do they classify low risk, mediate risk, and high risk sports?
Yeah, the classifications come primarily from the National Federation of High Schools. The National Federation of High Schools established the categories back in May when they issued their return to play guidance. The NFHS gathered most of those categories from work that was done by the U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee. For the sports that were not identified by the Olympic Committee, those were the sports that the NFHS took on their own to classify. Back in May, when those classifications were issued, much of the work from the NFHS aligned with the same standards that came out from the NCAA. So we did see alignment from this back in May with the international group from the Olympic side, and then from the governing bodies at the collegiate and the high school level with the NCAA and the NFHS. The classifications are really related to exposure to respiratory droplets as the primary classification there. So in your high risk sports, sports like football, like wrestling, where you do have significant contact within a 6 foot radius for more than 15 minutes throughout the course of the game or through practice scenarios, that's where the high risk category comes from, and then the moderate risk and low risk is reduced based on exposure.
Now, what is the NFHS?
The NFHS is the National Federation of High Schools. That is the national governing body for state associations. So each state and their state athletic association is a member of the National Federation of High Schools. In addition to governing athletics, so the rules that we use for high school sports come out of the National Federation. The guidelines and for regulations come out of the National Federation. And in addition to sports, they also provide guidance and regulations for student activities. So they have guidelines for activities like marching band, for debate club, and things like that. So it's high school activities and athletics.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how are things been going since the start of the pandemic to where we are now?
We're starting. We are learning a lot more as we go through this of how the virus contributes to spread from an athletic standpoint. And I do think a bit of a misconception out there that we often hear is that there's no spread through sports. Right. We know that there is spread through sports. What we're seeing relatively low numbers with through the science and the data tracking is that there's limited or low spread from team A to team B within a game or a sport experience. We are seeing spread intra-team around the sport, and you see that on a day just within our state. I mean, just think about how many times a UConn basketball game has been postponed or changed this year, right? So and because of COVID exposures to various teams. So we do know that it exists within sport, but it appears to primarily exist within the team. So, our mitigating strategies in the fall really focused on trying to address those issues off the field. And what do you do when you're on the sideline? How do you handle locker room situations? What do you do in terms of sanitation? How do you handle transportation to and from events? How do you handle the attendance at games, right? Because the community spread is an important piece of that equation as well. So we're learning a lot more about this as we move forward. But we have to accept that there are challenges to playing sports in a pandemic. We do know in Connecticut in the fall, while CIAC's numbers we're very good. We do know that in general, from sport experiences, youth sport, club sports, and otherwise, that we did have 17 school closures directly related to school sports. We know there were about, somewhere in the high 20s, 27, 28, 29 outbreaks that were directly attributed to sports. We know that there were about 238 teachers that were quarantined due to sport exposure. And we know that there were about 1,500 student athletes from the K to 12 level that were quarantined due to sports. So it has been an impact in the sport world, and that has impacted the educational setting. So we just need to be aware of that and take the proper precautions to mitigate those risks.
Now let's talk about the winter plan with what's going on with sports and the COVID.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, our planning really never stops. Whether we're working on the winter plan or we're talking about the spring plan, it's in a constant state of development and work right now through our collaboration with the State Department of Health, with the governor's office, and great work from the Connecticut State Medical Society Sports Medicine Committee. We were able to approve a plan and get moving with low to moderate risk sports. So for us, that has boys and girls basketball, gymnastics, boys swimming, up and running with their games and events right now. Indoor track, we're taking a little bit more of a cautious approach with, where we're starting practices, but we haven't begun the competitions or the meets yet for that. We'll be looking at the opportunity to do that probably in the month of March to get some experiences for those kids. But the limitation around that is, even in as a dual meet, if you will, with teams, your track teams are upwards of 75 to 100 kids per team. So even bringing just two teams together, you have 150, 200 kids that are gathering. And that's not even including coaches. So it's a limiting factor there. The other piece that is limiting across the state is that very few schools have indoor track facilities. We do have some. Obviously, you have the premier facility, the Floyd Little Athletic Center in New Haven, which is just a great facility. And then you have a handful of other indoor facilities around the state that exist at the high school level. But most of our schools, when you talk about indoor facilities, are used in colleges and universities. Our colleges and universities have shared with us, we don't have access to their facilities this year. So, we can't go to Cox Gage, at Yale and use that facility. We can't go to the Wesleyan Fieldhouse and use that facility. And understandably so. We understand the dynamic of bringing kids on college campuses. We've all seen the numbers on college campuses, so it makes good sense. But that's a limiting factor for holding those indoor track events right now. So hopefully, as we get to March, the numbers are a little bit better. Maybe we could do some smaller group things indoors if we need to, but if the weather's warm enough and we can get outside and reasonably do some track experiences outdoors leading into that winter season, we'd love to give kids some experiences there.
And I believe Haddam-Killingworth High School has a field house with an indoor track as well.
They do. I know Haddam-Killingworth has one. I believe Wilton has one. I think up in Westport and Staples, I believe there's one. Bethel High School, I believe, has one. So there are a handful around the state. I'd say there's maybe a half dozen or so around the state. But even with that, it's again, are those communities willing to bring large numbers of people from other communities in with the numbers where they are right now. So, it's just, again, it's one of those pieces that you have to be aware of. Our high risk sports right now as well, the recommendation from the Department of Health is that we limit high risk sports to small group conditioning and non-contact skill building through the winter season. For us, the winter season ends March 28th. So, essentially through the end of March, there is that limitation on high risk sports right now. Also, with all of our low to moderate risk sports that are playing, we're wearing a mask in those activities, with the exception of swimmers when they're in the pool. Again, makes sense. The other exception is gymnasts when they're on the apparatus. So gymnasts will wear a mask coming up to the apparatus that they're doing, then they'll take it off, perform their routine, and then put the mask back on. So when they are the sole athlete or participant up on the apparatus or on the floor event, whatever it may be, they take the mask off to perform and then put that mask back on.
Now, what about for winter sports? What about spectators, coaches? Are they allowing spectators to come to the event, or is everything going to be done teams only?
Sure. Yeah. Our recommendation right now, Pete, is to not allow spectators. Again, we understand that certainly parents want to watch their kids play, and we can understand that. But again, our focus right now is let's get the kids back in action. Again, it is the activities and the environment around the event that's playing where we're seeing the transmission and the spread. So we need to try to limit that as much as we can right now while we're seeing some of those elevated numbers. So our recommendation is to not have fans. The DECD sector rules, if you look at those rules that were recently updated, I believe on January 19th they were updated. Those suggest that for adult games and that there are no fans, and for youth games that it's limited to one parent per participant. So even in that manner, it's relatively restricted to who can attend. And at the high school level, there's transportation, to the event. You have coaches there. We have, certainly supervision of the kids in that venue. So, the parents, I think, in a lot of these cases, can probably watch it through live stream. We have most of our games are streamed on the NFHS network, so parents can certainly log in and stream and watch that event online. I know all of our hockey facilities, I believe, have the live barn cameras, so you can watch on live barn as well. So there will be ways for our parents to watch those games. And then, as the numbers improve, districts will have the autonomy to make the decision of what is right for their communities and their schools.
Now, as far as the winter sports and everything going on, obviously coaches are allowed to the events, and is it just basically coaching staff, players, and that's pretty much it? And officials?
Yeah, so, coaching staff, players, medical staff, trainers, doctors, that may be necessary at the events as well. And then your game day staff, you still need people to run the shot clocks or the game clocks and run the scorebooks. Also, athletic administration to be able to assist with media, again, without having fans in attendance. We want to make sure that there is access to the games, and making sure that there is some access for media to cover games is an important piece as well. So there will still be some people at the events and at these games, but again, we want to keep that number relatively small.
And with the winter sports season, that means there's no winter championship this year.
Correct, Pete. We had a lot of discussion about that, and the decision to cancel the winter championship really came down to looking at how can we get kids the most game experience possible. While we are allowing teams to come back on January 19th, and many schools did come back, we do see the majority of our schools, I'd say probably a little bit more than 50%, aren't coming back until February 1st. Okay, right. So we're seeing a bit of a delay in teams coming in. We have some that may not even come in until a little bit later than that, so the week of February 8th. So, and then we also need to account for that, as we saw in the fall with relatively good COVID numbers, better than what we have right now, that 15% of our games got rescheduled. So we have to anticipate quarantines, games being, rescheduled as well. So, when you put all that into context, if we were going to have a state tournament, it puts a hard stop date on the regular season. And the tournament ends up in a scenario where, you play a game and you could be eliminated. And that doesn't really address what we feel the most important thing is right now. And that's for kids to have time with their teammates, to have those experiences playing as much as possible. So by canceling the state tournament and allowing the leagues to design experiences, you're able to have a tournament-like experience, but you're also able to design opportunities that keep teams playing and give them opportunities if they don't win those first tournament games. So it maximizes opportunities for teams to play, especially if they're coming back from quarantines or different scenarios within the course of the season, and still give them the best opportunity to play the most games possible.
Now, how closely do you guys work with the NCAA?
We actually don't work with the NCAA in terms of, the decisions of what we play or, or the format that we use. Again, that all comes from the national federations. Gotcha. Our relationship with the NCAA is more on the eligibility piece for seniors who will be, going to college next year. So looking at how do transcripts look right now? Again, it's very different, right? You have schools in full distance learning, you have schools in hybrid, you have schools that have changed from doing a traditional schedule to a block schedule. So you have all different scenarios with transcripts and eligibility. So we do communicate with the NCAA on eligibility standards and to understand recruiting periods and how that's translating during this challenging time.
And obviously, you guys work pretty closely with the governor's office, correct?
We do. We do speak frequently with Paul Mounds, who's the chief of staff for the governor's office, and we do work closely with DPH as well. We're fortunate to be able to get some time with Commissioner Gifford as we come close to deadlines, but throughout the time that we work with them, Tom St. Louis from the Department of Health has been a good partner, and we have continued communications with him. Also, DECD Commissioner Lehman has been a tremendous help and resource, as well as we try to align as much as we can what's happening with interscholastic athletics and youth sports across the state.
Exactly. You guys are a very busy organization, considering what's going on in the state and what's going on in the world.
Yeah, education is very busy right now, and you never know what's going to happen from day to day. As you said, you're seeing schools that due to quarantine issues don't have enough staffing and need to go out at the same time. I think our superintendents and principals and administrators are doing a tremendous job trying to get kids in class as much as we can. I'd say our teachers have just been incredible. You think of the challenges that they have, not only in planning what they would traditionally plan for those kids who are in the classroom with them, but planning on top of that, these distance learning experiences that they've never had to do before, right? And they're doing this on a daily basis now, engaging kids online when it's not easy, and kids have varying levels of access. The educational system, I think, is taxed as much as any system right now. But again, we have great teachers, great administrators who are working their way through this, and again, our coaches are doing a tremendous job as well. You have to be concerned of the social, emotional, mental health issues that our kids are facing. We're seeing the numbers of anxiety and depression in high school age kids and younger kids as well really increase. And what's thought to be a significant contributor to this is the lack of structured physical activity that kids are provided because of limitations of the pandemic, and that's happening across the country. There was an article in the Sunday Times this past Sunday, talking about the prevalence of suicide rates amongst high school kids, and I believe they were referencing a story in Nevada where it's just had a tremendous negative impact. So, when you think about what meaningful relationships do kids have through their experiences, I think that coach relationship with kids is as strong as any that exists in the education setting, and that goes for any extracurricular, not just sports. I think the relationship that kids have with their choir instructor or their band leader or their drama coach, all those relationships I really think have a deep meaning to them, and we have to engage our kids in that. If we just focus right now on trying to deliver curriculum to kids, we're really missing out on a significant piece of the health of our students.
Absolutely. And I'm sure during what's going on with the pandemic, I'm sure online learning and remote learning, it's not easy.
No, it's not easy, and as we mentioned, Pete, different kids have varying access to that as well, and it's not easy for the kids, and is when it's not easy for the kids, it's not easy for the teachers as well. It's certainly not easy for the parents.
Nope.
Again, you think about what parents are juggling right now. You have, some parents that have to go to work, and yet you might have young kids that are in a hybrid learning scenario or a part day learning scenario, and now you're trying to balance and juggle. How do you provide for your kids at home if you have to be at work? We're seeing childcare facilities maxed out, so that might not be available as well. Or you're in a situation, as a parent, that you're working from home, and while you're trying to work, you have your kids that are trying to work, and if you don't have multiple devices, that's an issue. If you don't have the bandwidth that can handle multiple devices, that's an issue. So there are certainly challenges, to this. And again, I think everybody is doing the best they can and making the most of it. I don't think anybody, last March thought, hey, we better plan to be in this for a year plus. There just wasn't enough, known about it. So, seeing where we are now and looking at how Connecticut has handled this, I think as a state, we're doing better than most, and as well as anybody can expect to do at this point. And, we've had good leadership on the education piece of that to help get us where we are today.
Glenn, would you mind sticking around for another segment?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll be right back.
I'm here to talk about how we're going to defeat COVID-19. Well, we got to bring our A game. What's our A game? Here's the strategy. Get tested, stay social distancing, wear masks. Community Health Center has testing sites all over Connecticut, open 7 days a week, and they're free for anybody, babies, students, senior citizens, anybody. So go in and get tested. That's how we can all stay undefeated.
Find a location near you at chc1.com.
Community TV, your neighborhood TV.
Publicly funded and a reliable partner for cable companies nationwide. It provides transparent coverage of local and state government, education, and public programming.
A digital town green that can be watched anywhere, anytime, and on any device.
Watch us on today's high-tech distribution methods.
Community TV in Connecticut.
Local,
unfiltered,
reliable, and yours.
Welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm Pete Mezzetti, sitting here with CIAC Executive Director Glenn Lungarini. Glenn, welcome back.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, my friend. So, Glenn, we were talking a little bit about, in the first half of the show, winter sports and all that other fun stuff. Now let's transition to spring sports.
Yeah, we started that transition to spring sports very early. Again, when we started the process of looking at sports this year, every sport was part of the discussions. Some of the pieces as we were looking forward to the spring that right away caught our eye is, what is labeled as various risk levels in the spring. And for us, we really only have one sport, that's boys lacrosse, that's labeled in that high risk category that we cover as a CIAC sanctioned sport. Okay. Again, understanding that there are some schools, individual schools, that do have rugby programs that run in the spring, but it's not that's not a sanctioned CIAC sport, but that would be considered high risk as well. So a lot of our attention has been focused on boys lacrosse right now, and its classification as high risk in the spring.
You think there's going to be a lacrosse season this year?
I do. I think, there's two important venues, or avenues that we have to take for that to happen. First, the state DPH in Connecticut has been very consistent with following the NFHS classifications. And, so understanding that if a classification is going to change, it's going to need to come from the National Federation level. So we have taken the steps of asking the NFHS to review and consider reclassifying the sport of boys lacrosse. With that, we are asking for the details, the science and the data behind boys lacrosse and why it's being linked in with sports like football and wrestling. Again, those sports, football and wrestling, we can understand in that high risk category. Again, when we look at what we saw from the fall seasons for the states that did play, also, here in Connecticut, we know that there were some, independent teams that played football as well, and we are aware that transmission did occur in those sports. We know that there were at least 2 school closures that were directly linked to transmission in the sport of football in Connecticut. We do know from other states that played that there was transmission there. Again, I think everybody took mitigating steps to reduce that as much as possible, but it just showed that, the high risk categorization is appropriate. Same thing with a sport like wrestling, where, you can take a lot of mitigating steps, but you can't mitigate that you're going to be face to face and cheek to cheek with your opponent, or, during practice times that you're going to be in that same close proximity. There are mitigating steps that you can take. You try to put groups of 4 together, so you have lower numbers of kids in that contact scenario. You reduce meets to only dual meets, so you don't have high number of kids having multiple contacts. So again, there's ways that you can mitigate that we've put in place to do. But right now in Connecticut, we don't have that approval for high risk sports to play. So in boys lacrosse, though, we feel that the science shows that the contact time is more related to soccer, boys-girls soccer, field hockey, outdoor fall sports such as that. So that is our petition to the NFHS, is that they consider that. And if they don't have the science and the data that links it more closely to those sports like rugby, football, wrestling, that they recategorize it to what we see as a closer correlation in boys-girls soccer and field hockey. So that's one avenue to go. The other avenue is that the numbers in Connecticut suggest that you can play high-risk sports. Right. If you can play high-risk sports, then again, it's mitigating it as much as we can to be able to play. While we had conversations with DPH about football, and that's something that we've certainly heard from the public, kind of questions that, well, if we were at 1% or less at times in the fall and we couldn't play a high risk sport then, how are the numbers going to support playing a high risk sport in the spring? And, again, I never heard DPH say the numbers didn't support it. It was our conversations with DPH and the governor's office were always that there wasn't much known at that point, and that it was better to proceed with caution. And when we know more about it, then we can make more informed decisions. And so we know more about it and we can make more informed decisions. And that's what we're asking the NFHS for as well. Share with us your data. So if we are going to challenge this, we can challenge it from a standpoint of understanding exactly what science the NFHS is using in making their determination. So at the state level, our DPH, our doctors, can determine whether they agree with what the NFHS is saying or not. So, both of those, I think, are avenues that we are prepared and ready to explore and go down to get boys lacrosse up and running, and that would get all of our spring sports up and running for really a full spring season, including state championships.
Now, as far as spring sports with lacrosse and all the other spring sports, what do you think they're going to look like spectator-wise? To be determined again, Pete, I think we have to see where we are at that time. I again, wouldn't be surprised if, as we start the year with it, again, just let's get the kids out there playing, that, perhaps the recommendation stays the same. But when you're in an outdoor venue,
it does alleviate the risk a little bit. Again, something that we don't know right now is a whole lot of information on these new COVID strands, right? So you have, new COVID variants that they're looking at. The initial science here seems to suggest that the new strand may be more contagious. So you have to learn a little bit more about that and the prevalence of that in certain communities before you can make that decision with the spectators. Again, understanding that most of the data that we have and most of the science that we have right now, and that's what we hear from people all the time, right? Make the decision on the science. Well, most of the science that we have says it is the exposure around the game where the transmission happens. So when you're in the stands, when you're traveling to and from the game, that's where we're seeing it. So to limit that, I think optimizes opportunities for kids. But again, I think with outdoor venues, it does open up some greater possibilities that we can look at in the spring.
Now, how do you limit when you're doing a spring sport? How do you limit traveling? Obviously, how's that going to work?
That's pretty consistent regardless of the season. So if you think back to the fall and what's happening in the winter, unlike youth sports where you're carpooling to events, you might have, teams making plans to stay in hotels or to go for team meals. After you're just not seeing that in high school, right? We have the ability where you're on a bus, you're supervised. We can ensure that the kids are wearing a mask, that they're spaced out on those buses and have some distance. Within our leagues, we're trying to play games as much as we can within close proximity in those leagues. So, most of your travel is reduced to maybe a 20-minute ride, 30-minute ride at most. So, we've really cut that down. Then, when you leave the bus and you're going home, you're only, going home with people from your own family. Right. So we're able to mitigate that transportation risk pretty significantly in an education-based setting that just isn't as readily mitigated from a youth or club sport level.
Now, let's talk about the outlook for spring sports in general. How's that going to look?
Yeah, we're planning right now and really having as much of a full spring as possible. So we're looking at a March 29th start date. Originally, that was probably going to be mid-April that we were looking at a start date and looking at a June 20th finish. But again, with the recommendation to not have high-risk sports until the end of the winter season, which is March 28th, it took that alternative season that we had planned from February 22nd, where we were going to begin football conditioning. March 8th, we were going to begin that alternative season. April 16th, we were going to end that alternative season. Right. But with not being able to have contact, where you're only doing non-contact small group skill building with high-risk sports, it really is a limiting factor. And then also right now, the only sport that we had in that alternative season was football. The National Federation did come out with guidance that suggested if you play a spring football season, you should reduce the number of games that you play next fall. They also came out and said that you should not have any shortcuts. So if you normally have a 3.5 week preseason before your first game, you should maintain that 3.5 week preseason in the spring. So, again, if you're not starting something until April 1st, then you need to do 3.5 weeks of a preseason before you can even consider playing your first game. It just doesn't make it feasible in a state where we have so many multi-sport athletes that you could put have those seasons overlap. We have, I think 37 to 38% of our football players play a spring sport. We have 31% of our wrestlers play a spring sport. We have 27% of our athletes who both wrestle and play football, outside of that percentage that play spring sports. So you have such a significant percentage of overlap that it makes it very difficult in a small state to do that in a spring season. So with all those limitations put into place, the decision was made that it didn't make sense to continue to hold that alternative season. So with that, the start date for spring sports will be March 29th. We'll end the winter on March 28th, start right away on the 29th. We'll have pitchers and catchers going around March 20th. And we'd be looking at a regular end date of probably June 12th, 13th, that Saturday, Sunday for state championships. I think that also, in talking with school administrators and boards across the state and superintendents, in Connecticut, because you're only looking at 177 instructional days this year, because you can use the distance learning days and snow days. Pretty much everybody is graduating at their originally scheduled time. So most of our schools will be done by that weekend, that June 11th, June 12th, that Friday, Saturday, will be graduated. So, moving past that, there was some flexibility if we had to go a week past that. There was more concern if we were going into the last week of June.
Exactly. And who knows what graduation is going to look like this year?
Yeah, I think, again, hopefully the numbers are getting better. You might be limited where, you don't have the entire, family there, but, we're hopeful that, that there's outdoor facilities at places that, you can get at least, mom and dad and some representation of the family there for the kids. Everybody's focused on trying to get the kids as many, quote unquote, normal experiences. Right. As we can, and those are all things that, again, you have to look at as well. And how can you give kids experiences in proms? How can you give kids experiences in graduation? Even right now in the winter, we're talking about winter sports, but beyond the sports, in music, you're looking at winter percussion, and how do you provide those opportunities? A lot of schools at this time would be right in the middle of their rehearsals for their spring drama productions and musicals, and so you want to try to provide those opportunities as much as you can as well. So, as we said earlier, those are the places that we see the strongest relationships forge in our schools. So we need to be, looking at and keep in mind the extracurricular experiences for kids.
Now, it's CIAC. How many student athletes do you guys have?
On a yearly basis, it's a little over 70,000. We're usually right between 70 and 71,000 athletes. And so that's, those are athletes that just counting each one once. So, if Pete, if you played, soccer, basketball, and baseball, then we would only count you once in that scenario. The NFHS, when they count their numbers, they don't delineate out those multi-sport athletes. So if you ask the NFHS that same question, they would tell you that Connecticut has about 130,000 athletes. But again, that's because we have, so many, we have about 50,000 multi-sport athletes in Connecticut. So, the numbers that would report out of the NFHS and their annual summary is usually much higher than what we report, but that's because we break it down to just counting each individual once.
Now, as far as district-wise, how many school districts do you guys represent?
There's 186 high schools that are in the CIAC membership, and I want to say, Pete, that comes from, I believe it's 169 school districts. Going off the top of my head on that one, I'm trying to, just trying to play in my head, how many multi-school districts we have, like, Waterbury, has multiple schools. Stanford has multiple schools, so
Hartford.
Just trying to think that in. But I want to say there's 168 or 169 school districts in Connecticut and 186 member high schools within those districts.
Oh, wow. And one thing we have to mention, you work probably pretty closely with our mutual friend Bob Rader from CABE.
We do. We work quite closely with Bob, and like everybody else, boards of ed certainly have their hands full right now. Not only within their own facilities and what they're trying to provide in terms of education experiences for kids, but this has really taken a toll on our board's budgets. And I think people say, well, if the kids aren't in school, you must be saving money. And that's not the case at all. It's actually quite the opposite, because you're trying to get the technology for kids that you need. You're trying to provide, for teachers the resources that they need, and this has taken a significant toll on our municipalities and our school boards. Just as it's taken a toll on every business and every industry, it's no different when it comes to educational spending.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit more about spring sports and what people can expect.
So, again, looking at, that fairly traditional start. So if we're up and running on March 29th, you're looking at, those first 10 days, 2 weeks where you have your practice and scrimmage scenarios. And then, mid-April, we'd be starting those first games, somewhere around that, April 10th, 11th, 12th date. Start playing those first games, and your regular season would go right up to the end of May. And then your state tournament, looking from June 1st to June 12th, 13th would be the time frame for the tournament. So you would have really a normal spring. You'd have time to play all of your regular season games. Right. Baseball, softball would play 20 games. Your track meets every Monday, Tuesday, the way that they normally are. Lacrosse would get their 16 games in. Golf would get their matches in. And then again, looking at enough time where you could run a conference tournament and then play the state tournament. So all the time frames at the end of the season right now are mapped out to be normal as they would be. So that's the goal. That's where we'd like to be, and hopefully the predictions of things improving continue that trend and that positive outlook, and we could see a relatively unaffected spring.
Now, how are the tournaments going to look for spring sports?
Yes, same setup as what we're anticipating for the spring right now, where you would have your traditional early rounds, and then as you narrow down, look at possibly some neutral sites. So that's the one variant that we're not sure, and we won't know until we get to that point whether it's possible to use neutral sites. It may be that the best practice may still be to hold it at the higher seed. So, where when you normally get to semifinals, where you're playing those at a neutral site, we may still play those at the higher seed at that point, if it doesn't make sense to take two teams to a site that otherwise wouldn't have an event going on because of, again, COVID numbers and COVID exposure. But again, with most of our sports, the contact level is low to moderate. So, that is something that we're confident about. The other sport to really, kind of think about in terms of how we, sort of move forward with would be the track championships. Because again, multiple teams coming together. Right now, we're anticipating that the numbers, and where we are with vaccinations, because the state is doing such a great job, may support that. But if we're not in that place, then, we may have to make some adjustments with that because of the large numbers that would be coming together. But we remain optimistic that we'll be able to provide a fairly normal experience in the spring.
Now let's talk about what we actually should have started with winter sports first and then move to spring sports. We talked about spring sports first, but now let's go to winter sports and see what people can expect.
Yeah, so again, we're in the middle of our opening up, where schools can start sooner than January 19th with practice. So we do have some schools underway with their practices right now. Okay. We have a number of schools that have decided not to start until February 1st. So some of them are doing some online conditioning right now, and we'll begin getting their teams together February 1st. Okay. We have said teams can start practice games no sooner than February 8th. And, the concept within their repeat is having a 3-week period of time where you're conditioning. So if you started January 19th, you'd have, the week of the 19th, 25th, and February 1st before you start playing. Again, that's because the state was really shut down from sports from mid-November to January 19th. So when you have that much time off from structured physical activity, you want to make sure that kids are conditioning properly before they get into that high intensity play. So, teams that come back February 1st, again, anticipating they've had some level of online conditioning, we would require 15 days of practice, play, and conditioning before they enter into their first game. So that's why we play out to March 28th and give all that time for games to take place within conferences. It maximizes the opportunity for teams to play games without the limitation of a hard stop date from a state tournament.
Now, as far as for going to sporting events, as far as a team goes, because you're not going to allow spectators, everybody's got to have a mask on at all times?
Everybody wears a mask at all times, Pete, for the winter. That includes participants. The exception to the rule will be swimmers when they're actually in the water, right. And then gymnasts when they're actually on the apparatus. Right. So all other athletes will wear masks at all times, including while participating actively in the competitions. Officials will wear masks. Game workers will wear masks. Athletic trainers, coaches, anybody involved in the event will have to wear a mask. And it's a good point too when you think about sports like hockey. Basketball, where there is certainly a cardio component to that as you're running up and down the floor. I mean, you watch any of our girls and boys games now, it's not a half court set in most of these. Nope. For most of these teams, they got some kids who can run the floor, and so it's a pretty fast paced game, and so recognizing that, we've instituted what essentially is a TV timeout. Okay. So it's at the 4-minute mark or the first whistle after the 4-minute mark. In basketball and in hockey, there'll be a 1-minute stoppage of play to provide a mask break. So, again, it just gives an opportunity where you could safely distance kids. So it's appropriate for them to lower the mask to get some water, just take a breather. If their mask is getting sweaty, they can change the mask out at that point. They should have multiple masks with them or in their bag so they could change out if they need to. And so, in hockey, you'd be looking at the 4, 8, and 12-minute mark where that would happen. And, it's something that, again, strategy-wise will be something that coaches, can play a little bit to, knowing that you have that timeout coming, at that point. A coach may elect to save a timeout and, at various points of the game. And so those are all necessary elements to add in when we introduce the concept of wearing a mask during play.
Absolutely. We got a little bit more time left. So what else do we want to cover that we haven't covered yet?
It's a good question, Pete. I'm trying to think back of what we talked about or what I sent you. I think I think we covered quite a bit.
I think we did.
Yeah, just looking. Yeah, like I said, I don't see let's see, winter plan. I'll tell you, I think what might be interesting for your viewers, we get asked quite often, Pete, everybody around just playing high risk sports. Yeah. Massachusetts is playing. New York just announced they're playing. New Jersey's playing high risk. Illinois, that has played virtually nothing, have just announced that they're playing high risk. And, so we get asked quite frequently, is that something you want to cover?
Sure.
Okay, so
we got about 20 seconds. So
20 sites. Yeah. Pete, when we get asked about, high risk sports and those that are being played in states around us, the common element to that we would stress to people is it's been the decision of the governor's office and the state DPH to play those. When that guidance is given, then it's the responsibility of the state association to try to mitigate playing those sports. Right now in Connecticut, we have that limitation through the end of the winter season. And so that's what we're abiding by.
Cool. Glenn Longarini from CIAC, thanks for some time, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it. Happy to come back anytime.
You got it. Be well, my friend. On behalf of Glenn Longarini, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks, good night, and we'll see you next time.